Okay, we're on meeting number 3. I would like to call the meeting of the Urbana City Council, rescheduled from January 2nd, to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Ammons.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts. Wu. Mayor Marlin.
Here. Approval of minutes from the December 18th meeting. Is there a motion?
I move approval of the minutes from December 18th.
I'll second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Any corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those minutes pass. Any additions to the agenda? Okay. I have 2 items of public input. First is Tom Howley, which is who's representing the CU One-to-One program, and it's National Mentoring Month. So he's here to accept a proclamation. I'd like to read a proclamation by the Mayor of the City of Urbana, Illinois. Whereas, every day in Urbana and Champaign, mentors help youth in the community face the challenges of growing into adulthood. And whereas, research shows that young people matched with caring adults through a quality mentoring program are 52% less likely to skip school, 46% less likely to use illegal drugs, 78% more likely to volunteer regularly in their communities, and are more likely to have positive relationships with adults and to make positive plans for the future. And whereas the CU One-to-One mentoring program is committed to improving the lives of children through mentorships and resources. And whereas less than 700 youth in the Urbana and Champaign public school districts are currently served in the mentoring program, and many more youth desperately need the support of a quality mentor. And whereas mentors can commit to as little as 1 hour a week and still make a significant positive impact on the outcome of a child's life. And whereas the month of January is celebrated as Mentoring Month across the nation in an effort to decrease the number of youth who do not have a trusted mentor in their lives. Now, therefore, I, Diane Wolf Marlin, Mayor of the City of Urbana, do hereby proclaim January 2018 as Mentoring Month in the City of Urbana, and urge all citizens to recognize the important work that mentors do and support these mentors in their efforts to help guide the next generation.
Thank you.
And I have one last public input card. I'm not sure whether Mr. Reed wants to speak now or at the time on the agenda. Walter Reed? Okay, so you don't want to speak, but you are opposed to ordinance amending Urbana City Code. Is this the sewer lateral ordinance? Okay. So you're registering opposition to that. Thank you. Any unfinished business? Reports of standing committees? Reports of special committees? Reports of officers? Elizabeth Hannon, oh, Bill Gray.
Just want to update council. Today was the first day of our Christmas tree collection. We had to suspend that one day today due to snow fighting efforts, so we hope to start tomorrow. Again, this is with our own crews picking up trees along the curb line in the city. There's 1 pickup this year versus 2 we've done in past years, and we hope to get this work done starting tomorrow through at this point in time Saturday. So I just want to let everybody know that there's a 1-day delay in the pickup on one's normal use cycle day.
Thank you. Any other officer reports? John Schneider, Community Development.
Just a notice of a neighborhood meeting to be held tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Greater Holy Temple Church. Sorry, I'll repeat. Neighborhood meeting Wednesday, January 10th at 6 p.m. at Greater Holy Temple Church, 1409 West Dublin, to meet with the neighborhood developer, discuss the redevelopment potential of the Illinois American Water and site and several properties adjacent to that site along North Lincoln Avenue.
Thank you. Any other announcements? I would add a reminder that this Friday, January 12th at 4 o'clock is the 17th annual Champaign Countywide Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration and Awards. This year it's at Vineyard Church, 1500 North Lincoln Avenue. It's free, it's open to the public, and it's going to be different from previous years in that the featured speaker is a youth and the emphasis is on youth. So it should be a very really wonderful ceremony, so I hope you can all attend. Again, 4 o'clock, Friday, January 12th. Okay, next up, reports of officers. It'll be the financial forecast.
Okay, so I'm sure you all had plenty of time to read over the forecast report, but we'll give you an overview here. The financial forecast is really the first step in our annual budgeting process. It focuses on the general operating fund, which pays for most basic city services, such as police and fire, and most public works service. And this is basically used to evaluate financial condition, and based on that evaluation, make some high-level decisions about the budget process.
So just to set the stage and context for this report, as you remember from our budget discussion last May, we are taking a realistic shift in financial perspective, and really we are, as a city, adjusting to the new reality that we're facing today. We've made a commitment to take difficult but necessary steps to build a foundation for the future, and the strategic decisions we make today and the tough choices we make today is going to set the stage for our ability to serve citizens of Urbana into the future. It's based on financial transparency, accountability, and we'll have practical steps to improve our financial position. And the presentation we make tonight will also, to that end, the presentation we make tonight will also be shared with employees in 5 different meetings over the next 3 weeks. So just a reminder again to go over the long-term financial concerns. These were identified earlier around last year. They are still facing us today. We need to address pension funding. The longer we don't address it, the bigger the problem becomes. We don't have to look too far. The state of Illinois is an extreme example, but our neighboring city of Danville is another closer example of basically what happens when you don't adequately fund police and fire pensions. Danville, for example, has $105 million in unfunded liability in their public safety pension funds. In order to address that, they implemented a 10% property tax increase and also an annual fee of between $267 and over $1,000 per property for every property in Danville, depending whether it was residential or commercial. Their fire pension fund is only about 15% funded, and the police pension fund is only about 28% funded. We're not going there, and so we are taking steps to reverse the trend of the last few years, and we will be adequately funding our police and fire pensions. We're dealing with a structural deficit. This again was identified in the budget last year. That means basically our expenditures are outpacing revenue. It's largely driven over the last few years by the stagnant sales tax revenues. Currently, about 28% of our revenue in our general fund comes from sales tax. Those have been stagnant over the last 3 years. It used to be you could count on sales tax revenues increasing rather steadily, if small, from one year to the next. We can't count on that anymore. Part of this may be due to online sales. Part of it may be due to the overall economy in Illinois. The reasons, are varied, but the reality is our expenditures have been increasing faster than our revenues, and we have to take steps to address that. There's also the impact of a number of state decisions by the state of Illinois have had a direct impact on city finances, including their 2% collection fee on home real sales tax, their decision for this year to keep 10% of our share of the local income tax that typically goes to cities, and several other actions, and they're also considering action on property tax in one form or another. So those are the kinds of long-term financial concerns that we have to plan for. We aren't keeping up with our infrastructure maintenance. Probably one of the most frequent questions you get as council members is, what about this street or that street, or sidewalks or streetlights or potholes, or when are you going to fix this? And the fact of the matter is we're not keeping up the way we should. And then finally, we identified again, we have to rebuild our reserves. That's our emergency fund, our rainy day fund, and we are not quite we're not at the level yet as defined by our own financial policy, and as Elizabeth will mention, in a little while, we may think about actually increasing that, again, to deal with the situations that we're facing today. We have taken a number of actions in the current year in the budget that you passed. We made some budget reductions in the fiscal 2018 budget. You passed a small increase in the food and beverage tax. We offered a voluntary separation incentive program this past few months, and we have identified 2 net positions that would be eliminated through that VSIP program. We've also reduced expenditures in a number of other areas, and this year we were not able to offer salary increases for department and division heads, for management and most professional employees, and a number of other services were cut back. Difficult decisions, but it's part of this facing this new reality that we're in. So again, we're facing stagnant sales tax revenues. The state budget crisis is not over. We haven't even mentioned the implications of the federal tax changes, but we have to think about those. And we have to deal with our structural deficit. So those factors are major components of what we're dealing with today, and we will be dealing with for the foreseeable future going forward. I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, and actually we're not all doom and gloom, because what we'll be talking about tonight is a way forward. Despite our challenges this year, we can be very proud of. You've maintained a stable city tax rate of 1.3. We're carrying minimal debt, which actually will give us flexibility for decisions in the future. There's the finance department, IT, and a number of other departments have put in an enormous amount of time over the last few months getting ready to launch our citywide financial software. That purchase was authorized a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. But anyway, people have been working very, very hard to get our finances onto this new software, and that should help increase efficiency and and transparency and service to the public. We've also, our staff has launched the use of Citizen Serve, which is being used in the Community Development Services Department, and a parking management software. So these changes are helping people work smarter, and over the long run should help us achieve more effectiveness in our ability to serve the public. We cut ribbons on a number of very important roads this year. Airport Road, North Lincoln Avenue, Olympian Drive is now connected between the city of Urbana across the railroad tracks into Champaign, and the MCOR project had a very successful construction season, and we look forward to the next couple of phases of that, because in the end that's going to rebuild Green Street in Urbana all the way from Wright Street to Race Street, and that will become a complete street. So that's a major accomplishment. We are about to issue the RFP for the facility needs, for the programming needs assessment and facilities planning process. That'll be at least a 2-year process, but that's a long overdue focus on what our space needs are, how people are working, what our programming needs are, and what our facilities needs are. And that information gained in that process will allow us to make decisions on how we spend the public's money. A number of street resurfacing projects will, of course, continue next year. The city administrator search is ongoing, and we're making good progress in that. And staff and I have been working very, very hard on a number of economic development initiatives, because part of the way to close the gap and meet the needs of this community is through sustainable growth and development in this city, and that's very, very important as part of our overall plan going forward. So I view this financial forecast and the upcoming budget process as a way for us to be deliberate and thoughtful and disciplined, and make choices today, identify our priorities, make choices today that will serve as the foundation for what we will do in the future. So this is a positive step forward.
Okay, so before we get into the details of this thing, I found this quote that I wanted to share with you because I thought it was really appropriate. This is from Paul Sappho, who's a technology forecaster based in Silicon Valley and also teaches at Stanford University. He says, "The goal of forecasting is not to predict the future, but to tell you what you need to know to take meaningful action in the future."
In the present. Take meaningful action in the present.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that. So,
Paying attention.
thinking about too many things, I guess. But so, just to be clear, we don't have a crystal ball hidden in my office or the mayor's office. There are many factors that go into this forecast, and many of them are beyond our control. So the details here aren't as important as the general trends. That's what you really need to pay attention to. So again, we want to determine a general strategy. We want to make timely corrections to avoid a negative outcome. And again, I mentioned this before, but this forecast focuses exclusively on the general operating fund, which provides for most basic city services. It is just one part of a complicated budget with many funds. So looking at some key financial trends, the mayor mentioned the issue with sales tax growth. There was a time before 2015 when we could expect that sales tax revenues would grow pretty reliably. However, since that point, we're really not seeing any real growth relative to the rate of inflation. So currently, I'm estimating for next year that our sales tax revenues will be basically flat for FY18 compared with FY17. FY17 was down 3% from the year prior, which was only up about 0.5% from the year before that. At that same time, our costs were growing by 2 to 3% a year.
And this is not unique to Urbana. This trend cities are facing this trend everywhere.
Yes, I did have the opportunity to watch the presentation on the City of Champaign's financial forecast, and they are, I can assure you, in very much the same boat with sales tax revenue. Another key financial trend, again, is public safety pension costs. We're currently funding at the minimum required by state law, which is a goal of 90% funded by 2040. Continuing this practice, as we've discussed before, will result in much higher costs in the long term. This chart shows in green the recommended funding levels currently for police and fire pensions compared to what we're actually funding based on the previous goal of 100% funded by 2033. That gap is about $2 million annually. So the likely solution for us is going to be looking at extending the number of years to reach full funding so that we can reach full funding ultimately, but do it in a more moderated way. And our actuary is currently working on some scenarios that we will review with the City Council. The forecast assumes that pension contributions for public safety pensions will be increased by $1.25 million annually, phased in over 5 years in increments of $250,000.
Can I ask a question on that?
Mm-hmm.
So the recommended, I mean, the actual was what was statutorily required, right?
Yes.
And the recommended, what's the difference between the basis for calculating?
So the recommended amount from our actuary is based on the old state law prior to the change to 90% funded by 2040, so 100% by 2033. Realistically, we're going to have to compromise on that because even as it is, we'll be making budget cuts.
Okay, thanks.
So again, going back to the example the mayor mentioned, pension funding in Danville, $105 million unfunded public safety pension liability. They've increased property tax rates and imposed a public safety pension fee. That's the first step in a 20-year plan to fully fund their pensions. Prior to this, they've implemented some pretty severe budget cuts just to keep up with the minimum contributions. Our unfunded liability is currently less than $30 million, but it is growing, and that's something to be concerned about. We don't ever want to be in that position. In terms of the state fiscal crisis, in the current fiscal year, we lost about $500,000 annually due to changes imposed by the state. That includes the 10% reduction in income tax that's shared with local governments, the 2% of administrative fee on home rule sales tax revenues, and diversion of some personal property replacement tax that is shared with local governments. We fully expect that trend to continue. The forecast assumes that the 10% reduction in income tax and the 2% sales tax collection fee will continue. It also seems likely that limitations on our ability to raise property taxes will come at some point. Just for reference, that is only reflected in the worst case scenario here. So as we go through the forecast, we really look at two key indicators of our fiscal health, and you've all seen these before. We've talked about these before. First, we look at recurring expenditures in relation to recurring revenues, which really helps us to measure our ability to sustain programs and services over the long term. We may, at some point here, want to look at our current policy on that. Our current policy is we'll budget recurring revenues and expenditures at the same level. It may be prudent in the current situation to have some kind of gap there where recurring expenditures are less than recurring revenues in our approved budget. Also, we look at fund balance as a percent of recurring expenditures. Our current policy is 15%. We're close, but not there. And in fact, that may not be high enough in the long term, again, given some of the uncertainty that we're facing. When I looked at this a couple of years ago, before the council first adopted financial policies, I found that many cities of our size are carrying about a 25% fund balance. So we'll talk more about both of those as we get into the budget process. In terms of risk assessment, I think this is important to understand. The likely scenario is based on assumptions that we think are most probable. However, as you look at the scenarios, there's very little chance, I think, that we're going to see a best case scenario, but there is more risk that we could see a worst case scenario. That's a relatively high risk. So we should plan for the likely scenario, but prepare for the worst case as well. And that goes to the issue of perhaps building our reserves. So I know you all have the written report, but we want to go through a couple of the slides that are in that report. So again, looking at the forecast for the likely scenario, recurring revenues and expenditures. Expenditures are in green on this chart and revenues are in blue. And you can see as we move forward, recurring expenditures are higher than recurring revenues, and that gap just continues to grow until you get out to FY23, which is the fifth year of the forecast, and that gap is $2.5 million. That means our expenditures at that point would be $2.5 million higher than our revenues. Looking at growth in recurring revenue and expense, again, expenditures are green, revenue is blue here. All throughout the forecast period, we have expenditures growing faster, generally from 3 to 4%, and revenues growing much more slowly. You can see a little bump out here in FY22. That's about when we think that the state will begin to take account of the new census data in their per capita revenue distributions. And in fact, we expect that that will benefit us a little bit because the population of the state as a whole is shrinking, but our population is growing just a little bit, so our share should go up a little bit. So looking at projected fund balance, this chart shows all three scenarios. The blue line in the middle is the likely scenario. You can see the unassigned fund balance decreasing over time. The only question is, you know, when do we get to zero? And again, this is if we do nothing, which is not going to happen. But by FY22, even in the likely scenario, it shows our fund balance bottoming out. So looking more closely at the likely scenario, the blue line here shows our current policy of maintaining a fund balance of 15% of recurring expenditures. You can see for this year we're projecting we'll be just a little bit under that level, but then it declines over time. So one of the things I wanted to do this year was take a look at you know, what does it take to fix this problem? So this is just basically a simulation that shows some things we could do to fix the situation. This includes both expenditure reductions and revenue increases. This isn't a recommendation, just kind of to give you an idea of the order of magnitude. When I give you these simulations, these include $1.5 million in expenditure reductions over 3 years beginning in FY 2018 and $1 million in revenue increases over 4 years beginning in FY 2020. But the main thing to focus on here is that we need a correction, if you will, of about $2.5 million if things go as we expect. Phasing those corrections in over time would give us the ability to give full consideration to all of our options and also adjust if things turn out to be a little better or worse than we expect. So with those corrections that I just mentioned, you can see what happens to some of our charts here. Recurring revenues and expenditures are very closely aligned in this chart. And then you can see we've got our revenues and expenditures growing at more consistent rates. In terms of fund balance, again, the green line is our 15% policy, which again we think may not be quite high enough, but still we're measuring against our current policy. You can see that the fund balance grows just fairly slowly. but keeps us at or above that policy of 15%. So what we're recommending are a number of things. As I said, we're going to be sharing this forecast, this presentation, just as you heard it tonight. We'll be sharing it in meetings with staff that have been scheduled in 5 meetings over the next 3 weeks. We are basically asking for input from staff, from City Council, when we'll accept and we'll review all the suggestions that come in for budget reductions and revenue increases. We're going to plan for $500,000 in budget reductions in a fiscal 2019 budget. That'll be followed by $750,000 in budget reductions, revenue increases in fiscal year 2020. So, you know, it's a combination of both. And then we're going to be evaluating all the different revenue options. We don't know what those are yet, but if we're seeking sources of revenue, it's going to be sources that will grow with time to keep up with recurring expenses. And again, the value of a 5-year forecast is that you know, each year you have time to sit back, evaluate the situation, assess the situation, and make adjustments, because we don't want to overcorrect or undercorrect. But if you have a 5-year plan, at least you can look ahead to the future and start making some plans. The goal is to limit our increases in expenditures, and if there is a one-time expenditure, you know, we would give priority to one that's going to increase efficiency or productivity in the city. We just have to work smarter. We're pretty smart now, not to say that, but like I said, the financial software system is a good example of this. This was a big one-time expense. I think it was over $300,000, but it's going to pay off in the long run. The other focus we'll have is, whenever possible, to build our reserves. Any of the conferences I've attended since I became mayor, and the sessions, especially at IML, and I listened to mayors from cities who had been hit by a tornado or hit by one financial disaster or another, they all said, whatever you have in your reserves, it's not enough, because you can't count on help from sources you may have thought you could. So they to a person said, if you possibly can, make sure you have a healthy reserve. So that should be one of our goals. We don't, we're not there yet, but that needs to be one of our goals. The staff is currently preparing a inventory of city services, and they're looking at that and how they align with the high-level mayor and council goals. And to that end, I'm in the process of arranging for the goal-setting session for this council. This council has not had a chance yet to evaluate our city goals and city priorities, so we hope to do that in February. And those priorities identified by the city council will also be taken into account as we go ahead for budget preparation. We need to think about, as Elizabeth noted, updating our financial policy on recurring expenditures. Currently, our expenditures pretty much equal our revenues, and if we gave ourselves a cushion of 97.5% of recurring revenues, that would provide us more flexibility. And we, again, need to consider updating our financial policy on our fund balance. Currently, it's 15%, and it's probably a safer approach would be to closer to 25%. These aren't achievable right now. We're not going to do that this year, but it's something to have as a goal. And again, this is our approach and our plan to build a strong foundation in this city for the future. We have our economy is based on education, on the healthcare industry, and government. They are the anchors for our local economy. The city of Urbana is the county seat of Champaign County. We play an enormous public service role to this county, and that's not often acknowledged enough, I think. We've
are focusing on economic development opportunities. We have a number of programs in place. Our TIF districts and our enterprise zone, our Think Urbana program supporting tax rebates on new construction. We have a number of sites in our community that we are focusing on development. So those efforts are very strong and ongoing. And what we need to do, and we need to be doing always, is focusing on financial sustainability. It's one of our top city goals now, and it will be in the future. And again, it's going to give us the options and the flexibility we need. And the bottom line is so that we can provide the programs and services that our citizens deserve. So I look at this process that we're going through and what we will be following as we develop the budget as an opportunity to really position ourselves for growth and doing good things for the citizens of Urbana. Well, and you can't end a presentation without a quote from Abraham Lincoln. So the best way to predict your future is to create it. And that's what this proposal and discussion is trying to do.
So thank you both. And I had a question about the sales tax concern. You said that this is a trend that's happening, whether it's in Champaign or various different places. And that struck me because it appears as though Champaign is building everywhere that they possibly can. So I don't understand. Maybe you can help me understand or explain why, with so much development and all the things that are taking place in Champaign, why are they still suffering in the same way?
I'm not sure I could explain that in any level of detail, and but I know that across the state, I talked to many finance directors, and we're all dealing with the same thing. Sales tax revenues are either just stagnant or not growing at a level that's keeping up with costs. I mean, I think a lot of what's driving this is e-commerce. We know that's part of it. People, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why this is happening at this point in time, but people are increasingly shopping online, and when that happens, they're not normally paying any home rule sales tax, for sure, and sometimes they're avoiding state sales tax as well.
I guess I'm running the meeting. Jared?
You were gonna get from there. So one thing that I had a question about, can the city run a campaign to shop local kind of a thing? I mean, I honestly wasn't aware prior to become involved in wanting to be in local government that spending your money locally had such a big impact. And I'm proud to say that since I learned that, my shopping on Amazon has decreased dramatically. I almost don't order anything but a couple of times a year now. When I used to order a couple times a week, I would order stuff on Amazon. Do you think that there's any prudence in having a campaign or something to raise awareness about, what it means to spend money locally and keep your dollars here?
Well, I think it's a great idea. The Urbana Business Association, sponsors the Shop Local campaign, especially around the holidays. But I think expanding that to year-round is a great idea. And it's probably true. Most people don't think about the impact of their online shopping. And we live in a community where, 20,000 of the population are students, and that's got a very and that population also has a very high percentage of shopping online. So I think that's an excellent idea.
Young people are notoriously bad, A, about being informed about local government, but B, not shopping online and what their money means here. So.
But it's not just students, it's everybody.
Sure, it's
we
everybody.
all,
I would say that we're notoriously more bad than other age groups, though.
There was Dean and then Bill. It's much easier to see people from here.
I don't know that it's that people are unaware, but the bottom line is it's so much cheaper to buy online. It's significantly cheaper. We have some type of law where you're supposed to self-report if you buy items online to the state. If that were actually enforced or improved, would that money in any way come to our local community? Would it be like if you lived in Urbana and you bought online and self-reported, a certain percent of that would still come to the city, or is it all just going to go to the state?
So you're talking about use tax.
Yes.
And so, yeah, for example, many years ago, I bought a car out of state. I got a good deal in Indianapolis. And so what I had to do was come back and fill out a form for the state and pay the difference between the sales tax I paid in Indiana and what I would have paid in Illinois. So use tax is distributed differently when the state collects use tax, which is also where the Amazon tax goes. It goes into the use tax pot. That gets distributed, a portion of that gets distributed on a per capita basis to all the municipalities
Okay.
across the state, whereas sales tax is directed to the municipality where the transaction took place.
So there is some benefit to us locally if that is followed or enforced.
Sure, yeah, there's some
Okay.
benefit.
Well, that's good to know. It's pretty much impossible as far as retail products go for a storefront with overhead to compete with a place that only has a warehouse. You know, so, thank you.
So.
Oh, Bill
what-
was next there.
Okay. So first, for the revenue enhancements, you aren't proposing anything in particular yet. You haven't proposed a 0.5% food and beverage tax, for example?
No, that was last year.
Yeah,
You-
okay.
yeah.
Just wanted to clarify that.
No.
And then for the assessed valuation assumptions, how does that take into account, say, major developments? If something happens with the old water company and that's a $30 or $40 million development, are you making any kind of assumptions about those type of things, or is this just kind of a general increase in value assumption?
It's a general increase in value which is intended to take those things into account, but of course if we have more growth because of new development, that's obviously in the good category that makes the forecast look better. We do take account of things like the end of the life of a TIF, which would cause a spike in our EAV. But honestly, this year, well, you have to weigh when you're doing a forecast how much time you want to spend getting into the details versus how important it is to get it done.
And then with almost anything like that would probably be an enterprise zone, and you won't really start benefiting from that for a few years anyway because
Right,
of
yeah.
the tax rebates. Yeah, I'm kind of with Jared. I think there might be an Amazon backlash coming, actually. I've heard some people kind of talking like they're going to not shop on Amazon anymore. Not just, I mean, for various reasons. They're getting big, and people don't like big companies around here. With
Big is.
let's see, I had another question. Oh, also on the sales tax issue, I know county market closed. It was closed for all of FY17, and presumably those people are still buying groceries in town somewhere, but a lot of them were probably people either that were loyal to county market or were coming from out of town on their way to work, stopping at that county market, and now they're going other places. So I guess, I don't know, you probably have the ability to look at that, and that's kind of proprietary when it comes down to business by business who generates the taxes. But between that and the, I guess there was a national drop in car sales, at least the first part of 2017, or some part of 2017. So I'm not totally disappointed with the sales tax being a little flat for a couple of years because of those things. So I don't know. I hope that those sales tax projections are a little low and that they will increase a little bit, but I think it's safe and reasonable to do that. But thanks for all this. I think it's great information to have going forward. I think last year you did a 5-year forecast too, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah,
it's
and the
great
year
to
before.
have these for a few years in a row. And it's really dramatic seeing the difference, especially with the fund balance, going negative in a few years versus staying about where we want it. So lots to think about. That's, I guess that's the bottom line, and how we're going to come up with that $500,000 in reductions and potential revenue enhancements down the line. You aren't really talking about, you weren't modeling anyway, revenue enhancements.
Not tonight, no.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
So I have a question for Elizabeth. Technical feasibility, I don't know about the political feasibility, but would it presumably be technically feasible for people should fill out on state income tax returns, sales tax on online purchases. And now, it would be technically feasible, would it not be, because each state taxpayer comes from a particular address, it would be technically feasible for that also to be rebated to the city as other, would it not?
Are you suggesting the state's going to give us a bigger share of income tax?
Not income tax, sales tax,
Okay.
online sales tax,
Oh,
sales
you
tax on
mean-
online purchases.
Okay. Yeah, I don't.
I'm saying this in the hearing of the spouse of a state legislator.
I'm not feeling very hopeful about the state giving us more of anything.
Of anything,
I think
yeah.
it's going to be less rather than more. But yeah, conceivably.
Okay.
Sure.
So I guess the question is, you know how to move money around electronically, and so the question is, it should be technically feasible to do that. I mean, it may not. Political feasibility is something else, but presumably that would be technically feasible. Do you think? In terms of the information technology.
Well, we're talking about the state. So yeah, I mean, should be, yes.
Should be, okay.
Really, when you think about online sales, I think that's something that has to be more effectively addressed at the federal level.
Yeah,
You know,
should be.
state by state, it's hard, but they ought to be able to figure it out at the federal level.
Well, it makes sense to do that at the federal level.
Yeah.
I mean, but that
Yeah.
the Marketplace Fairness Act apparently is completely stalled at the federal level, and that was the attempt to address it. So.
We have Jared and then Jim.
Go ahead, Jim.
When you're talking about some form of sales tax for internet sales, this issue has been discussed nationally. It comes up periodically. What you're getting involved with is the Interstate Commerce Clause. So the mayor is correct. The way to address that is at the federal level, not the state level.
Jared.
So I had I've been puzzling over this, Elizabeth, ever since you sent your report out, in the need for overall budget reductions, but at the same time needing to contribute more to the pension funds. So is the projected 500 and 750K reductions in expenditures, and take it that's a net, not just like we're going to decrease 500, we're net going to spend 500 less. So we might actually be spending more money, right? Because we need to contribute more to the pension funds. I just don't understand
Right.
how those...
A portion of those reductions we're going to have to make over the coming years will be used to pay for the increased pension contributions. Because if we don't do that, it's sort of like borrowing from the pension funds. So
Right.
if we put the money in sooner, they have that money, they'll invest it, they'll earn interest on it, they'll reduce the unfunded liability. But the longer we wait, the more interest we're going to pay on that.
No,
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, I'm with you 100% on why we need to increase what we're spending on it. I was just curious in the language, as far as
Yeah. So
to me, it's an increase in spending, not a decrease in spending.
Well, I think it's a decrease no matter how you look at it. So if we cut 500,000 from other areas of the budget in FY19, which is what we're suggesting, and we increase 250,000 to begin to pay down that pension liability, then it's still a net decrease.
Okay, that's all.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. This report is online. The slides are online?
Not yet, but they can.
The slides will be online soon. and people are free to write with any more questions. And as I said, we'll be doing this at least 5 more times. And I think one of those will be recorded so that it'll be available to watch as well. Okay, the last item on our agenda for this meeting is new business with appointments to a couple of boards and commissions. I recommend appointing Elizabeth Horowitz, Libby Horowitz, to the Urbana Business Association Board. She'll be replacing Brandon Boyes as the staff representative to that board. And Visit Champaign County Board, Rachel Storm, who's our public arts coordinator, will be the staff representative to Visit Champaign County, and she is taking Natalie Kenny Marquez's place. Is there a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Aaron. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that motion passes. With no further business before the January 2nd rescheduled meeting of the Urbana City Council, this meeting is adjourned.